The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the Career Partners International webinar series. I'm Chris Boyd, I'm the head of marketing at CPI, and we're thrilled that you took the time out of your busy day to be here. As many of you know, Career Partners International is a global provider of outplacement, executive coaching, leadership development, and career management services. While we focus on these programs, many of our partners and colleagues work in other areas that your network might find value in. These webinars are our way of sharing their experience with you. So before we kick off today, I have a few notes on the logistics of the webinar. We have a lot of participants, so you will all be on mute throughout the duration. If you have a question, please type it into the question section of your GoToWebinar panel. We'll be collecting these questions and addressing them at the end of the session. We're also looking for your input at certain times throughout the webinar, so you can provide that in the question section as well. To minimize the panel, click the orange arrow at the top left. And just so you all know, all sources of questions will be kept anonymous, so feel free to ask whatever you'd like. We will be emailing a copy of this webinar and a code for your SHRM PDCs after the event. So with that said, let's dive into today's topic, harnessing the potential of virtual teams with our host, Bill Floor. Bill joins us from our CPI partner, Learning Dynamics. Learning Dynamics has over 35 years of experience coaching and training organizations. Bill himself has over 20 years of experience managing teams in both human resources and sales. He's trained groups on topics ranging from legal compliance to talent management in both small and Fortune 500 organizations. We couldn't be more excited to have Bill today leading our session. So Bill, thanks for joining us.
Hello, Chris, and hello, everybody. Good day wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see so many people attending today. And so you know, from a housekeeping standpoint, we are going to keep the pace moving here today. This is going to be interactive. We want to make sure that this is as engaging as possible and as valuable as it can possibly be for the time that you're going to share with us today. So let's get started. Again, my name is Bill Florin with Learning Dynamics. We won't stay on that picture too long. You can take a look at it later if you like. Let's take a look at our learning objectives. We really want to focus on these 4 key bullets. And one thing I'll just mention that's not here is the fact that this is not about convincing you that virtual teams are a thing of the future or something that you need to get good at. My guess is that the 100 or so of you who are on this webinar today understand that virtual teams are a reality, and we want to make sure that we take our time to really dig into how you can maximize the performance of that virtual team, achieve your goals. And this really is an important skill because it's different than just what it takes to lead people and supervise people in a face-to-face physical office setting where you see those people all day long. So let's take a look at the next page here. Virtual Teamwork Challenge, and this is your first opportunity to interact. As Chris explained to you, we're going to use the question feature. This is a listen-only call, but this is your opportunity to respond and give us some feedback. And I would just ask, there's a little bit of echo on the line, so if anybody has anybody who can talk can mute, that would be terrific. And so here's the question: what are some of the things that you find challenging when working with virtual teams? What are some of the obstacles to productivity you've encountered? So I'm going to encourage you to take just a moment or two, give us a few words, a short sentence or two. Tell us what are some of the challenges that you face. I'd like to get a feel for what's going on with the audience today so that we can make sure that we address those points.
So I'll read these as they come in, Bill. So one is the team dynamic. Definitely team engagement has popped up.
Excellent.
Feeling connected, staying informed when things are moving at a quick pace.
For sure, absolutely.
A loss of inclusion.
Kind of, yeah, that disconnectedness, right?
Yep. We have not being able to actually see someone's reactions.
Okay.
Different cultures. That's popped up a few times here.
Excellent. Well, that's terrific. And I think that's enough to get us started because we're going to address all of those things. And I'll just comment on the not seeing people's reactions right up front. One of the programs that I am particularly passionate about at Learning Dynamics is a program that we do on communication skills. And a key point that we make throughout is that communication is more than just the words that you use. It's very much about body language and intonation. So the point about not being able to see somebody is important, because we know that body language actually makes up more than 50% of the impact of our communication. So as much as possible, if you can use video conferencing technology to get a sense for how people are feeling, that can absolutely improve the quality of communication. And you probably know that from sending an email that was misinterpreted, or you received an email and you thought that somebody was not happy when in fact they were neutral, or some other mood. It's really easy to misinterpret both in the sending and the receiving roles when you don't have the additional context of body language and tone. So as much as possible, use that technology that you have to help. So, and the other pieces around team dynamics and engagement and connectedness and loss of inclusion, we're going to address all of that today. So thank you so much for that. Let's take a look at the next slide. And I know there's a lot of text here, and I'm not going to read this slide to you because, again, you're all smart people. You can read, and you're going to receive a copy of the PowerPoint presentation anyway. But I'll make a couple of comments here and emphasize some of them for you. So some of the points that you see here are just common sense. The first two, obviously, around time zone differences and what time is it today, especially relevant with daylight saving time that just kicked in. Yesterday or on Saturday, we had a 5-hour difference between New York and London, and today it's 4. And what time is it in Arizona or that little piece of Indiana? I don't know, right? So you've got those pieces to deal with. So some of those issues, again, are very simple, very matter of fact, and a matter of awareness. Equipment issues, technology issues, same kind of thing. But others are more complicated and require some planning, some tact, and some purposeful action to overcome. And I think it's critically important that we understand all of these elements as they affect our ability to lead teams virtually. Okay, so one of the points that we have here, the fourth one, it says lack of productivity of meetings and conferences. And I'd like to address this in depth on this slide. We don't have a separate slide for this, and that's purposeful because we didn't want to turn this into a webinar on how to have meetings. But I'll point out to you that there have been many, many studies that have shown that there's an incredible loss of productivity worldwide, in the US, everywhere else, when meetings are ineffective. And maybe you've seen the meme that, I survived a meeting that could have been replaced by an email, those kinds of things. This applies even more so in a virtual setting. So with meetings, I would just suggest to you that every meeting has a before, a during, and an after. And it's critically important that you think about all 3 stages when you are working with virtual teams. Otherwise, you're going to lose productivity. And you also have that additional challenge of the fact that you're working remotely. So if you don't plan and you don't have a good idea for what it is that you need to accomplish, and what it is that's going to happen during the meeting, and what it is that you're going to do after the meeting, you could really stumble and fall. So just very quickly, the before, make sure that you are inviting the right people and that you're really clear as to what the purpose of the meeting is. During the meeting, have an agenda and stick to it. Make sure that the people who are invited to that meeting, whether it's a teleconference, a conference call, whatever it is, or of course, live face-to-face, make sure that you stick to that agenda and the folks who are there understand their role in it and that they see that there was some value in attending. Worst thing is to have somebody waste your time by inviting you to a meeting and you don't have any input whatsoever. You could, kind of catch a recap in writing and have picked up that time. And then finally, and this is critical in a virtual setting, is the follow-up after your teleconference or after your meeting. Okay, ensuring that you're taking the time to follow up with folks and that they understand what it is that's expected of them. Okay, so every meeting, whether it's a physical meeting where we're all in the same room together or virtually across the planet using technology, can benefit from a plan. Okay, some of the other challenges, poor participation in group discussion. We're going to spend some time on that because it could be a cultural thing. It could be a language barrier or accent issue. The out of sight, out of mind piece, I think, certainly speaks to connectedness and loss of inclusion. It's really easy to develop a relationship and camaraderie when you're in the same office with somebody every day. But if you never see that person or rarely see that person, that can be more difficult to do, and it requires some proactivity, some purposefulness to really build those relationships. We'll take a minute to talk about document sharing, definition of roles and responsibilities, and building personal relationships and trust. So let's move on. Some language barrier tactics. And this is a very easy problem to succumb to, in that we tend to get, in meeting settings, we tend to get a little bit more casual, a little bit, less reserved, and we can wind up using slang and sayings and figures of speech that simply don't make sense to somebody who speaks a different language as their first language, and maybe English is their second or third or what have you. So ensure that when you are communicating, take into account the audience you're working with, so that you can scrub your language of words and phrases that are not going to make sense. And I'm not going to give you a bunch of examples. I think you could probably come up with some on your own, but there are certainly all kinds of opportunities to improve by using common words, common English, if that's the language that you're operating in. And I'm assuming since you're on this webinar, that's the case. Use the simplest words possible to convey your message, because people who are using English as a second or third language may not understand every synonym. You know, they may know the one word for use, right? They don't know the word utilized, perhaps, and that's just a very simple example. But as much as possible, use simple language. I'm not saying sound like a kindergartner, but if you have an opportunity to use an easier word, go for it. If you've ever tried to learn a different language other than your native language, you know how difficult this is. Okay? So put yourself in the other person's shoes. Be intentional in the speed and clarity of your speech. What we're saying here, again, is that if you speak too quickly, and maybe, again, you could put yourself in that other person's shoes. If you've ever tried to learn another language, when someone speaks slowly and clearly, you can understand them. But when they start speaking quickly, it's very difficult to do. I'll give you an example from my experiences. I struggled through Spanish in high school, but know a little bit of Spanish. And if somebody is speaking to me slowly, I have a pretty good chance of understanding them. But if I go into, say, a Mexican restaurant for dinner and try to use some Spanish, and that person who's serving assumes that I know Spanish and starts talking quickly, and that person's dialect or accent kicks in, I have absolutely no idea what that person is saying. The same applies when you're working with virtual teams in an international setting. Make sure that you're taking that into account. Whenever possible, back up the communication with written communication, written material, to reinforce or to ensure that folks know what it is that you want them to do. Some people will even use some resources within their office, especially if they struggle with some of the verbal communication. They might take a little bit more time. Make sure that if you're working with an international team where you have a mix of language skills, that you're using written materials to support that. This is a big one on humor. Okay? Things that might be funny in one country or one culture could be viewed as offensive or nonsensical in another environment. But absolutely ensure that you stay away from the use of humor, except, with the exception of the most innocuous and, maybe about being on time or something like that. But even that, in some cultures, depending on where it comes from, if the joke is coming from somebody high up in the organization, it could be seen as, oh my goodness, I'm in trouble, I need to go get my resume ready and go find another job, okay? So there are all kinds of opportunities here to be misinterpreted or to cause concern. You really need to think about everybody on that team and how your communication is going to have an impact on each one of them, both as a group and individuals. Moving along, I'd like you to use the chat box now to tell us in just a few words, what do you do to encourage participation during conference calls and video conferences? Because this can be challenging, especially when folks are multitasking and maybe only paying partial attention. What do you do to get participation? Use your question box and let's hear what you have.
Polling slides is the first one that pops up.
Uh-huh.
Calling people out by name. Asking open-ended questions. Video for all participants.
Excellent. So you can see the facial expressions of everybody involved. Yep. Okay.
Giving them an opportunity to present.
Excellent. So assigning roles and responsibilities so everybody gets a chance to participate. All terrific ideas. Good. What else?
Asking for alternative views. Oh, and allowing the team to speak before the manager does.
Perfect. Excellent. Great. All right. There's a lot of good stuff there. And the polling feature is certainly valuable. It's a tool that I've seen used very, very effectively to drive engagement and to make the time go by quickly. So if you've ever been on a conference call or a video conference where somebody is just droning and there's no opportunity to interact, that hour can feel like 5 hours. It can be just painfully slow. I loved the comment about open-ended questions. That whoever it was that offered that, thank you very much. I think that that's critically important. And I'll just, to clarify this point, open-ended questions in and of themselves are good, but not the end-all and the be-all. What I'm saying here is that if you're going to ask open-ended questions, it's critically important to take it to the next step and to listen and to paraphrase. So what am I talking about? Really what I'm talking about is the use of active listening skills that can be used over the phone, that can be used in person, that can be used in a teleconference. So if you ask an open-ended question, which is a question that cannot be answered with a yes or a no, and makes sense, right? An open-ended question typically starts with a who, what, where, when, why, or how. You're going to ask a question that's going to get people to think and to give an answer that goes beyond a simple yes or a no. And they're going to give some information. And then if you really want to show that you're listening, and this is the key part, if you want to show that you're listening, paraphrase the answer that you received to your question. Not parroting it, not repeating it, but paraphrasing. It might sound like something like this. So if I understand you properly, Jane, what you're saying is blah, 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 putting it into your own words. That closes the loop on the value of asking open-ended questions, is to paraphrase, did I get that right? And seek to clarify or to confirm understanding. And then Jane would say, yes, Bill, you got that right. Terrific, great, let's move on from there. Fantastic, really appreciate that. So let's take a look at some tactics that you can use. Now this is an important one, this first one, and this is very, kind of tactical, pragmatic thing to do. If you are having a teleconference or a video conference or whatever it is with your team, or some mix, sometimes you'll have meetings where you've got several people in one room and in Asia and several people in another room in North America, what have you. Make sure that you have a roster of everybody who's on the call or in the video conference. And then as people participate and make good points, you can place a check mark, make some notes, jot down some of the things that you're hearing, as well as some of the follow-up questions that you might want to ask after the call. So that way you can follow up with the person and say, you know what, Rajesh, thank you so much. The point that you made on the call was terrific today. I'd like to speak with you a little bit more about that. Okay. The idea here is that number one, you've got a tool that you can track to make sure that you've heard from everybody, which can be difficult to do in a larger group in a remote setting. But secondly, it shows that you truly were listening and that you're interested enough that you're going to follow up and ask some questions after the call. Very valuable point. Calling by name those who've not been participating. Oh, so what do you think? And I think we heard that from one of the people who answered on the last question. Get as many members as appropriate on the agenda. However, make sure that you're scrubbing that list to ensure that you're not wasting people's time. Right? It's too often we sometimes see managers and supervisors who feel a little bit powerful and they feel like, oh, the more people I have on my meeting, the more important I am. Okay, nothing could be further from the truth. Don't waste people's time. Get people on the agenda, make it interesting, make it engaging for everybody, but don't invite people who don't need to be there. Okay, provide positive reinforcement. I'm trying to do that a little bit with you here today. Right, so when people give good feedback, when they give good ideas, it's easier to do when everybody's audio is turned on and maybe you can see their faces when you have video set up. That's a lot easier than in this kind of a format, but you get the idea. You want to encourage that. You want to encourage people to give feedback and to share their ideas. Okay. The second to the bottom, when you have follow-up one-on-one conversations, thank the team members individually for their contributions. Okay. I've already made that point when we talked about Rajesh just a minute ago. And that name comes to mind because I did some work for somebody yesterday, and his name was Rajesh. Change the order of your agenda to get different people to start the meeting. And I think that this is something that you all get, and a couple of people mentioned about assigning different roles and responsibilities. Okay, so these are just some tactics that you can use, but I'll suggest that the more that you can do this, and especially after you've done it once or twice, people will understand, if I'm invited to this meeting, I can't be multitasking. I can't be spending time doing other things, reading emails, looking at my Facebook on my phone, because there's a really good chance I'm going to get called on, and the expectation is that I'm going to participate. This isn't just dead time or downtime. I need to add value. And by doing that, they'll prepare, they'll be thinking critically during the call, they'll be contributing with input that'll add value to the conversation. This is a critically important slide. If you're not doing this now and encouraging people to participate and ensuring they're participating by using some sort of a tool like we described here, this right here is worth the price of admission for today's webinar. It can make a huge difference for you. Let's take a look at bridging the distance, and this is critical as well, in that when we talk about bridging the distance, this comes back to some of the concerns that you mentioned right up front, is that it can be very challenging to build meaningful relationships with people. It can be easy to be forgotten in this kind of a setting, right? We want to overcome that out of sight, out of mind mentality. Because it's just kind of human nature. When people are in front of us and we're dealing with them, again, we pick up on their body language, we pick up on their intonation, we can just kind of sense from across the room how somebody's doing on a given day. All of that gets eliminated when you're working remotely. You don't see these people, right? So you want to make sure that you're purposeful in this and really demonstrating some serious leadership intent by being purposeful in your language as well. Not just the frequency of the communication, but letting people know, hey, Rajesh, I'm glad we're able to connect today. You're a new member of our team. I want to make sure that you're comfortable, and I want to do everything that I can to get you to be a productive and valued part of the team right away. All right. So using that kind of purposeful language so that defenses can come down, and your employees, your team members will understand your intent. You're not asking them personal questions to use against them at some future time. You're just asking questions because you want to get to know folks as a person. And that's really our third point, is that in person, when we're in the same space, it's easy to talk about the game yesterday or the weather today or what you're doing this weekend, or your coworker has a new picture of his or her dog or cat in the office. You get the idea. Those things are harder to do from a distance. So you need to be more purposeful in adding some of this water cooler chit chat into your interaction. So it's not just all business all the time. Get to know folks, get to know them as part of your team, and take that extra step for those remote people so they can feel better about what's going on. Okay. Other things that you can do. One would be to make sure that you spend some time with some one-on-one time in conversation after your teleconferences and your group work. Build some rapport by asking questions of your team individually. Get to know what's going on in their lives. Other things that you could do would be to set up kind of a buddy system or pairs or teams within your own team that would bridge the distance. So maybe you've got people in Europe and North America and Asia. Maybe you set up small clusters where you have one person from each area in that cluster and really challenge them to get to know each other. In a positive way, of course. Sometimes the word challenge can be a little bit confusing and sound negative, but really work to build those relationships so that everybody can get to know each other. If you think about it, if you've ever been to a corporate training session, and this just kind of comes to mind from the learning dynamics experience and from my career, is that a good facilitator is going to mix up the teams. So the first activity is going to be work at your table. The second activity, you're going to count off by fours and then go to different corners. The next activity is going to be some other configuration. You get the idea. Do the same thing with your virtual teams so that people can get to know each other as individuals, so that they're not only interacting during your group meeting. Help them build some relationships outside of those kinds of settings. Let's take a look at this slide. This is kind of a practical point here, is about document sharing and written updates, because we know that when you are working across distances, unless you happen to be, in the same country, for example, in the US, yes, okay, so we have time zone differences, but it's only 3 hours from east to west coast. If you're working, internationally, globally, it could be a bigger challenge. But whatever the case is, we know that not everybody is going to be on every conference call or every teleconference all the time. So a good best practice, if you're not doing it already, is to use technology, whether it's file sharing like Dropbox or Google Drive or SharePoint or whatever you're using within your organization, so that nobody gets forgotten, okay? And that everybody knows where to go to find the information. Because sometimes what happens, the point of the second bullet, is that sometimes we'll send out a recap and it's in an email. And that person didn't see it. The person was on vacation, came back after 2 weeks and had 600 emails to go through and just kind of missed it. But if you have a repository of this information, what did I miss about this project or this program or this initiative, that person doesn't have to go and search for an email. Okay, so using that. And I'd like to ask you, just you have 3 different examples of technology on the screen there. With those logos. What's some of the other technology that's being used out there? What are you using? And I'll just open that up as a question very quickly. What are you using in your organization? What's hot? What's new? What have you found to be particularly effective? Chris, we getting any responses on that?
So we do have OneNote, the program.
Yep, Microsoft OneNote, sure.
Yep, Microsoft Teams as well.
Mm-hmm. Any others?
Box,
right? So Dropbox, Box, whatever.
I haven't heard of that one yet. Well, we do have 2 boxes, so that's perfect,
right.
I guess. Ignite, Jabber, Cisco Video Phone, Zoom.
Awesome. Okay, so you have a lot of tools that are available. If you heard some of those that Chris just mentioned and you're not familiar with them and you're looking for a solution, there are some ideas for you. Okay, I'm not here to sell you on shared folders and cloud-based drives and all this kind of stuff. All right, somebody vacuuming? All right, I'm going to drive on from there. If you've got noise in the background and you're on a live mic. And this final point here is that by using shared drives like this, of course, managers and supervisors can check in and see the progress as well. And that might sound like, oh, gee, that's great. Now my boss can see all that all the time. And the answer is, yeah, absolutely. Because what that can do is that can cut down on emails, and that can cut down on phone calls, and that can cut down on meetings that are quote unquote status meetings, right? Everybody loves those. Right, where you sit down with the boss and, so tell me what's going on with this, tell me what's going on with that. If the supervisor, manager, team leader, project manager knows where all that information is and just can go and read it, that can absolutely cut down on some meetings and some time spent doing that as well. All right, we're making great time here and moving at a terrific pace. So thank you for the interaction so far. We'll have a couple of other opportunities to do that as well. So let's take a look at defining roles and responsibilities, because this was actually one of the concerns or one of the ideas that was presented by one of the participants here during the chat sessions. So our first point is pretty obvious. The leader must lead and clarify the roles and responsibilities for everybody else. Okay? Sometimes in a physical face-to-face setting, when we're all in the same office, it's really, sometimes those things can be inferred. Sometimes people just know from history what it is that they're supposed to do. In a virtual setting where you have remote workers, it's critically important that you take the time to be clear as to who is going to do what. Otherwise, what happens is, and maybe you've seen this, you have people who are spending a lot of time just trying to figure out who does what. So who's responsible for this? Who do I call? Who do I need to email? What have you? By clarifying roles and responsibilities up front, and roles and responsibilities whenever there's a change in the configuration of the team, maybe somebody leaves, somebody gets hired, somebody gets promoted, this project is ended and we're moving on to the next project. It's critically important that you, as the leader, are taking the time to clarify those roles and responsibilities for everyone whenever it's appropriate. Maybe you'll create an organizational chart to document that as well. And think about how you could use that organizational chart to accomplish some of the other things that we've already discussed during the course of the call this morning. For example, you might have an organization chart that shows name and title and, you know, who reports to whom with, you know, with the lines and all that stuff, right? That's great. That's a basic organizational chart. Better than nothing, right? But what if you were to include the office location? What if, as your team developed, you know, included something about a personal interest, or when that, you know, the month or the week of that person's birthday, or those kinds of things, without sharing confidential information, obviously, right? Here's Bill and here's the social security number. You get the point. The idea is that we want to use every opportunity that we can to build teams. So if you have an organizational chart that explains who does what and where, right? Layer in some of that other stuff so that people can, you know, so that people can get to know each other as individuals. It can absolutely help overcome the issues of distance and inclusion and being left out, right? So have some fun with it, get creative. Maybe there's somebody on your team who would enjoy doing that, right? What's your favorite sports team, right? Whatever, go for it. What do you do when you're not working? Let's include some of that. Let's have some fun with it. We talked about the third point already, and this final one, when somebody's out of the office, and depending on the organization, this could be for an extended period because work cultures are different in different parts of the world. So in the United States, we all work all the time and we try to be Superman, and you know, I haven't taken a vacation in 3 years. But in Europe, guess what? That's crazy talk, right? In certain European countries, people take off a month at a time, right? They're gone. Right? If I'm in Scandinavia, hey, it's vacation, I'm up at the lake, I don't even bring a phone, right? So you're not going to hear from me for a while, right? So understanding the cultural differences, the cultural norms. In France, for example, right, and depending on the organization, right, they have to shut down the email servers after 6 o'clock in the evening because they consider, you know, getting emails at night working off the clock. Doesn't fly in that culture. Understand the parameters and understand the different cultural issues that you're dealing with and anticipate them right up front. So if somebody's going to be out on holiday, okay, make sure that you've got a plan in place for who's in charge when that person is away. And maybe you'll have a special organizational chart that would include when a person is going to be away on vacation. Or maybe you have a special organizational chart for the months of July and August. You have to do what you have to do for your organization, but take those things into account so you can plan for them up front and you don't get tripped up with surprises. Okay, so a lot to think about there. Hopefully we've given you some tools that can help. So I've got a question here for you. If you've been a virtual team member now or in the past, what have been some of the things your supervisor has done well to build trust among the team and with you directly? Okay, so I'm asking you, what has your manager, what has your supervisor done to help build trust with you directly or among members of the team? Let's take a minute and see what kind of responses we get there, and I'm going to take a sip of water while you do that.
So Bill, we're seeing weekly coaching, getting to know me as a person. Consistent one-on-ones has popped up a few times.
Okay.
Getting an effort to know me personally.
Okay.
Just checking in periodically. Relied on performance to indicate that work is actually being done. So developing trust.
Okay.
Increasing responsibility.
Excellent.
Accessible and responsive.
Yep.
Rescheduling and not canceling meetings.
Got it. Okay.
Allowing me to move forward with smaller decisions without requiring approval.
Okay, so empowerment. Okay, excellent.
Allowing me to lead my status updates.
Terrific. So it's not just sit down with your boss and the boss says, hey, let me tell you all the things I like or don't like about you, right? So yeah, everyone loves those. Yep, okay. So maybe one or two more.
Communicate to the whole team positive outcomes, so celebrating victories.
Oh, okay, yeah, absolutely. And that can be a challenge over distance too, right? It's like, again, think about the different elements of communication. If I'm face to face with you and I'm smiling, you know, handshakes and, party streamers and whatever, that's a little bit hard to do from 4,000 miles away. Yep. Okay, good. Maybe one more.
Making connections with other team members that we might not have known about.
Oh, terrific.
And birthday party in a box.
Okay. All right. So I don't know if we can do this, but birthday party in a box. So everybody else stop answering. Okay. Birthday party in a box. This is a new idea to me. I can imagine it might be a box with some fun stuff inside, but the person who gave us the answer on birthday party in a box, can you expand on that just a little bit? What is in the box? I want to know about that.
So I promise not to call out names, but if you can add a little more information to the question section, we'd love to hear it. All right, we can follow back up at the end in the Q&A if we get more info there.
Yeah, all right. So everybody else stop, because I think we have enough there. There's a lot. So if you did share with us the birthday party in a box, certainly please share a little bit more information, what goes into it. And I'm going to add that to my repertoire for next time too. That's kind of fun. You can imagine what that would be. And of course, it's probably hard to do a birthday party in a box if you don't know anything about the person, right? So I do enough that can help. All right, so let's take a look at the next slide. So we're going to be talking about building trust here, and we're moving along nicely. And there has been a tremendous amount written about trust. And what I would like to impress upon you today is that trust is not a feeling. Trust really is a tangible asset. It's really intangible, but for the sake of this point, I want to call it a tangible asset that you earn. Okay? You have a balance in the trust account with your team. Everything that you do can either build up that balance or it can take away from that balance. All right? So if you are, truthful and honest with your folks, that's going to build the balance. If you are if you're not entirely honest with them, it can certainly take away. Okay, but this is critically important. I know I've used that term a lot, but really what we've done in this short webinar today is taken the most essential elements of leading a team at a distance and sharing it with you. And I keep saying this is critical, this is critical. And the reason why I'm doing that is that it's true. All of these are important. So what I would hope you would do is come away from today's session with some practical ideas that you can use to build the performance and your effectiveness as a manager or as a leader with a virtual team. This piece, the building trust piece, is universally applicable and especially valuable in a virtual team setting. So trust is earned through action. What am I saying here? Is that when people first join your team, it takes them some time to come to trust you. How does that happen? Well, it happens by you making commitments as a leader, as a manager, and following through. So if you say, I'm going to meet with you on such and such a date and time, and somebody in the last chat mentioned that about rescheduling, not just canceling. If you say that you're going to do something for your team to get them resources, to get them something that they need to do their job better, whatever. And if you do it, great. Okay? I said I'm going to do this. I did it. Everybody's good. Right? That's going to help you build trust. If you don't do those things, like if you were to start off, hey, welcome to the team, and I'm really big on one-on-ones. I'm going to make sure that we have some consistent one-on-ones. That was something that somebody said in the last in the chat. Right? We're going to have consistent one-on-one meetings so we have an opportunity to communicate. And then you don't follow through and do it, and you don't make yourself available. Well, that was just empty talk, right? You are absolutely having a negative effect on your trust account that you have with that person, okay? So building trust, it's not just a feeling that comes over time. It's something that you can be proactive about to build trust more quickly. So my point here is this, is that when you get new people on your team, or if you're newly assigned into a team as a new manager or leader within an organization, a department, what have you, okay? One of your first priorities should be to build trust as quickly as possible. So what I'll suggest to you here is this, is that you go in and you find a way, and maybe you take a legal pad, or you take your Microsoft OneNote and you create a new tab inside of OneNote, and you say, things I'm going to do to build trust with my team, and you list your team members. Maybe there's 6 people or 10 or whatever it happens to be. Make some notes on things that you can do proactively to build trust more quickly. Don't let nature just take its course. You want to take some specific action that you have planned to make a commitment to each of your team members individually and to follow through so that you can build the balance in your trust account more quickly. Okay? It's something that is purposeful, it's something that's proactive, it's something that does not have to happen by accident. You can build it very quickly by being purposeful and proactive in your planning. Okay? Moving on to the next one, let me give you the trust building challenge, and this is it. Make a list of everyone on your virtual team. The second bullet, I think, is the most important and the most difficult. And it says, write down 3 things about each person that demonstrates you know each of them as individuals. For example, family makeup, hobbies, vacation interests, okay? And this is kind of an old sales trick, as a matter of fact. And we've talked about this at a couple of different learning dynamics meetings. There was an exercise where we were given a list of questions, and the purpose was, how much do you know about your clients? So specifically the relationships that you had with your clients. And this came from the Harvey Mackey book, How to Swim with Sharks and what have you. But the idea is similar, is that if you can't come up with a few points of interest, some things that you know about each person on your team, if you're challenged to do that right now, you probably have not gotten to the point of developing trusts and engagement and the most productivity and effectiveness that you can get from each individual person, and therefore as a team. And then finally, the point that we just made is to write down 1 commitment that you can make to each person over the coming weeks. Okay, so if this is something that you can't do, think about it right now. Take just a couple seconds and think about the people on your team. Can I name 3 points of interest about each of these people? If not, you have some work to do. Get to work, make a phone call, get to know them, send them a party in a box, whatever it is that you need to do to expand on that. Chris, did we get anything else on the party in a box?
We did. So party in a box includes a coupon for a cupcake, a party banner, a hat, and a card from the team.
Very nice, very nice. So there's a great idea for you. And I'm going to borrow that one for the next webinar, by the way. I wrote that down. Thank you so much, whoever shared that information. Okay, our final topic for today, and we're doing great, is to understand cultural differences. And now this is, I need to preface this, and Chris actually added this exclamation point triangle danger Will Robinson thing to our slide. So thank you for that, Chris. What I want to caution you on is to not indulge in using stereotypes based on what you see on the next 2 slides, because that's way too easy to do. Well, all people from this country do this. Well, that's not true. You know that, right? This is just something to be aware of as one other data point that you could use as you are getting to know people who happen to live in different countries, come from different cultures, what have you. Okay, so don't make general assumptions about individuals, get to know them individually, and this is just one more piece that can come into play. So this information, I'm not making this up. This came from real research, and the references are at the final slide, and you'll have it in your packet as well. Is we want to take a look at the ideas of collectivism, individualism, and hierarchy, because it could help explain, if you're working with somebody from a different culture, how they behave, especially if you're in a position of authority over that person, if you are the manager, the supervisor, the leader, what have you. Okay, so our first slide talks about collectivism versus individualism. And we might have our assumptions and say, well, you know what? The U.S., don't fence me in, wild, wild west, and the U.S. is all about individualism. Surprisingly, the U.S. is somewhere in the middle. And this isn't necessarily because we are so loyal to our employers, even though we would hope that that would be the case. But there are other parts of our lives where collectivism, meaning coming together and sharing ideas and spending time with like-minded individuals, is important in our lives. This might have to do with our faith communities, right? So churches, temples, synagogues, mosques, whatever. It could have to do with our alma mater and our favorite sports teams. It could have to do with political party, right? So in the US, collectivism is somewhere in the middle, but in other cultures, it can be dramatically different. So in Germany, for example, it's very low. And this could be a function of 2 world wars, right? Where that whole collectivism idea and going along with the herd probably didn't work out so well. Right, that could be affecting attitudes in Germany. In the UK and South Africa, more highly independent. Okay, again, these are some ideas that I would just suggest to you that you keep in the back of your mind if you're working with people in cultures where collectivism isn't really such a big deal. You know, going rah-rah team all the time isn't necessarily going to get you where you want to go. Okay, or talking about your individual performance to somebody from South Africa, you know, might not be the best strategy if you're using that all the time, where a more collectivist approach might make some sense. Okay, so be aware of these things and understand that not everybody thinks like you. So depending on where you're coming from, they could be on the same page or not. You just don't know. So get to know. And that, you know, a great way to handle this might be, you know, when you get that new employee, so, you know, what motivates you? What are you really excited about? What gets you out of bed in the morning and excited about coming to work? Get to understand that. From some people, you might hear, well, you know, I'm all about the team and, you know, I want everybody to succeed and I think that the organization is great. I believe in its mission. For other people, it might be, you know what? I'm the first person in my family who graduated college and I'm really, you know, driven by my career and I want to succeed and move on and be successful and lead and blah, blah, blah. You might get a more individualistic trait that you're hearing. Get to know people individually. Again, this is just a data point that might help you understand somebody a little bit better. And then finally, as we wrap up, is the importance of hierarchy. And what we're looking at here is that in India and China, generally speaking, there's a lot of deference that's paid toward formal leaders, towards managers. Okay, and this probably shouldn't be all that surprising if you pay attention to different cultures. Whereas in Canada, it's like, yeah, whatever. It's a much more casual approach. I mean, look at look at Justin Trudeau, right? I mean, he's he's Mr. Casual out there hanging out and partying with everybody. That's a different kind of a culture. If you were to watch the news, and I'm not making generalizations, but if you were to watch the news and you look at Canadian leadership and the news stories that you see about them, and Chinese leadership, for example, there's a vast difference between the formality, the deference that's shown, just the attitudes towards towards leaders. Okay, so be aware of that. So if you're coming from a culture that's highly deferential towards leadership because hierarchy is important, and you're not getting that kind of response from people from other cultures like the UK or in Canada, that could be part of the reason. So you need to understand that. And again, not everybody is like you. The caution finally though is that you can't paint with a broad brush and use stereotypes. Just use these as things that might inform or even just very simply serve as a catalyst for some conversation. Okay, so if you're more interested in that, there's some resources that you can take a look at that are out there. So those are your key points. Let's take a look at our summary. Get to know your team, be purposeful and consistent in your communication, plan for effective communication meetings. And this is just super important, the planning piece. It has to happen, whether it's a face-to-face meeting, a group meeting physically in person, or over distance. Building trust through action. If you say something, do it. Okay, don't say it if you're not going to do it. Use your calendar. If I say to Charles, I'm going to do this for you, make sure you put that on your calendar so you don't forget. Because guess what? Your subordinates, your team members, the people who report to you, they're going to remember that you made a promise and didn't follow through, and they're going to tell other people about it. They're going to tell their spouses, their friends, when they're hanging out at the club having a beer, they're going to talk about it. My boss is a jerk and this is why. Okay, you don't want to be the subject of that story. Follow up on your on any work that you've assigned to folks. Be accessible and then be aware of these cultural influences that we just talked about. So that's our wrap up. We're going to move into a Q&A mode. I hope that you've had an opportunity to take away some ideas, some that you can use right away. Might be creating that roster and checklist so that you can spend some time following up with your people and being purposeful about building trust. And with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Chris.
Thank you, Bill. We have some questions coming in now. And again, if you have any further questions, please type them into the questions section and we'll get to them now. So the one that has popped up a few more times, I think it is a crowd favorite today, is birthday in a box. So I will confirm. This is a box that includes a coupon for a cupcake, a party banner, as well as a hat, and a card from the team. So great little takeaway there.
Terrific. So that requires some advanced planning. If you're going to pass the card around and the team is in different places, that card's going to travel a bit before it gets to the person on time, I would think.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, good. That's a neat idea. Thank you for sharing that, whoever did that.
So the next question we have is, what do you find to be the most challenging part of leading teams from a distance?
Yeah, for me, and I've led teams. One team that I led was a group of folks who were on the west coast of the United States, from the Canadian border to the Mexican border, essentially. And my office was in Dallas, Texas. And I didn't see them very frequently. So the challenge with that group was really getting to know people and getting to build meaningful relationships. And what I found was that by going above and beyond to follow through on the commitments that I made to them and really taking a service or a servant leader type of mentality with the team, it helped accelerate that relationship building process to the point when that the team really did come together and we started to get some results. So that for me was the big thing. It was about building valuable, effective relationships with folks. And the more purposeful you are with some of the ideas that we talked about today, the easier that can become for you. Thank you.
Great. So the next question we have is, do you ever find that some people just are incapable of working remotely?
Wow. Yeah. I think that's, and this is pretty well documented out in the world. And I think this is part of the reason why some organizations have brought people back in-house. IBM did it, Yahoo did it, other organizations have done it as well, is that some folks just don't have the maturity and the self-control to stay on task, and they get wrapped up doing whatever else it is that they do if they're working from home. And so this is where the follow-up piece can really help you. It can help you identify those folks who really just can't handle it and need to be in the office, or maybe they're just not a right fit. But you certainly don't want to jump to that conclusion, and that's the point where your consistent one-on-one conversations, being available, having regular communication with that person can help you, number one, build the relationship, so hopefully that person will come around and perform at a higher level. And then secondly, the flip side of that coin might help you come to the determination that this person is not a good fit for this role.
Great. So one of the questions we have coming through is, if trust is lost, what would you recommend one prioritizes to rebuild that trust?
Wow, that's a great question, and it's something that's common, right? Because you don't know how people are going to respond. You could spend a year or two building trust with somebody, and then you make one mistake, and you feel like you're all the way back to zero. And that depends on the person that you're working with. And there's one person who comes to mind from my work experience where, frankly, I messed up. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like I did something that jeopardized his career. I just made a mistake, and I handled the situation the wrong way. And he held a grudge for a while. And frankly, I'm not sure that we ever got back to where we should be. But in any kind of a situation like that, all you can do is, if you made a mistake, own it, apologize. You know what? I'm so sorry that I did that. It was a mistake. I was wrong. And now let's move on from there and then start rebuilding, right? Make sure that you don't use an apology that's like, well, I'm sorry that you were upset by that. That's not a real apology. If you made a mistake, own it. I am sorry. This is what I did. It was wrong. And then move on from there. If you're dealing with a mature adult, hopefully that person will get over it and you can start rebuilding that trust account right away. Good question. Thank you.
All right, next question. Do you recommend or ever use psychometric or personality tests to help you understand your remote team members?
Yeah, you absolutely can. We at Learning Dynamics, we do this quite frequently. As a matter of fact, we just had an assignment last week where we had senior managers from a healthcare organization. That team had recently formed, and the executive vice president felt like they weren't really gelling as a team. So we used some assessment tools. In this case, it was Myers-Briggs, MBTI, to get those folks to understand themselves better, and also to understand each other better, so that they could understand them from, for example, the introvert extrovert qualities or other things. So yeah, absolutely. If you're having trouble getting the team to gel, getting them to understand each other, there's real value in using a tool like that, whether it's MBTI or DISC or any of the others that are out there.
All right. Bill, if you're working with a team that lands on two ends of the spectrum, say the hierarchy spectrum, how do you help them work better together?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of things that you do there. Number one would be to let folks know what you expect and how you work as the leader of the team, right? So if I'm the manager, I'm going to tell you what I expect, and this is how I communicate. This is when you can expect to hear from me, what have you, and setting some ground rules for how the team is going to interact. So yeah, you might have a vast difference. You might have a large team in Bangalore, and then you've got a large team in Vancouver, okay? So total opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of hierarchy. How do you get them to work together? Well, you know what, number one, that's going to take some time, and number two, I think it's going to absolutely benefit you if you can get them working in small clusters that go cross-culturally, so they can get to understand each other as individuals, and over time you'll build a norm for the team. That's going to take a little bit of time and some purposeful conversation, some one-on-one probably, but in this case, the more that you can get them working together across boundaries like that, and building personal relationships, that can absolutely help. And also, if your expectation is, listen, I need you to be honest with me, and if you give me bad news, I'm not going to be mad at you or upset with you. Tell me the truth, right? And I've heard this. There's one industrial client that we work with that has a large presence here in Connecticut, but they've got people across the planet. They've got people in Europe and in Asia and what have you. And one of the common concerns that I hear is that yes isn't always yes. A person will say yes just out of hierarchical deference when the answer might be something different. And that's where your one-on-one conversations afterwards can come into play, and you can be very direct in your questions and really understand, is yes really yes, or is it something else? Or are we just saying yes to be polite during the meeting?
All right, next question. We are looking for a point of clarification on collectivism versus individualism. If you could just recap how to read that chart that you provided.
Okay, sure. Let me scroll back here. So collectivism versus individualism. What we're saying here is that the smaller stacks, okay, the Germany, Brazil ends, tend to be more individualistic, whereas the India, UK, China end tend to be more collectivistic. So it could be more, if you're talking about working with folks in a culture where collectivism is more important, the leverage, you might get more leverage talking about team and organizational mission, those kinds of things that could resonate with members of your team. Whereas in a more individualistic culture, like in Germany, that kind of a thing might not work. They're maybe a little bit more sensitive to some of that thinking, and want to understand how they fit in individually and what their individual role is. Not that they don't want the team to succeed, but they're not necessarily going to rally behind the banner just because you said it's important. You have to, again, the trust comes in as well. And I think the other point here is to not overstate this point. Again, this is just something that can help you understand, well, gee, some folks seem to really get excited about our company's mission statement, and others not so much. Maybe cultural experiences have something to do with that. I hope that helps.
Absolutely. And last question, what is the quickest way to connect with your team if you rarely see them in person?
Yeah, and that's really, I think, the point of this webinar is that the whole concept behind it is about giving you some tools that you can use with folks who you rarely see. Would be all of the above, really everything that we've worked on. But what I would suggest to you is that frequency of communication is going to be important, but not just frequency in and of itself, because low quality, shallow interactions done frequently are not going to get you where you want to go. You need to be purposeful. If I'm going to have a conversation with somebody, what do I want to learn about this person today? What do I want to accomplish in this phone call? I'm not just going to call and say, hey, what's up? But, hey, let me get to know you a little bit more. Let me share a little bit more about me and what's important to me. Good, high quality interactions when you're asking questions and demonstrating through the active listening skills that we talked about very early in the webinar today, show that you are genuinely interested in that person. And the more that you can have those high quality conversations, just like with the people you see face to face, your family, your kids, right? When you have real conversation that's genuine and it shows that you care, that comes through, whether it's across the table at dinner or across thousands of miles on an internet connection.
Perfect. Well, that concludes today's CPI webinar. So, Bill, thank you so much for providing your insight on this complicated topic.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It was fun.
We'll be following this webinar up with an email containing a copy of the presentation as well as your PDC activity IDs. So again, thank you all for joining us at the CPI webinar series. Everybody have a nice day.